Hello and welcome to Sky9, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Dhruti Athri. Now, every single day, the world changes. A decision taken in Washington, a conflict in West Asia, or maybe an economic policy announced by central bank can travel thousands of kilometers and change the life of an Indian family living in the US. Now, in today's world, global events are no longer just headlines. They have become deeply personal. Today, we bring you 6 important stories that kind of explain how geopolitics, global markets, and immigration policies are becoming closely connected. We will separate facts from claims. We will explain what has been officially confirmed and help you understand why these developments matters to you. So stay with us till the very end because every story tonight is connected by one important message. In today's world, a global crisis can quickly become a personal challenge. I'm Dhruti Athri, and once again, this is Skyline. So let's start with it. Rather, let's start with our top story tonight. For years, most Indians working in America's tech industry believed that the biggest threat to their careers was artificial intelligence, or perhaps another round of layoffs. But now, many economists, they are saying that another factor, it is there. Another factor that deserves attention. And that factor is not inside Silicon Valley. It is thousands of kilometers away in West Asia. Recent fighting involving the United States and Iran has kind of raised concern about global energy supplies. According to reports, military organizations and tension around Strait of Hormuz have increased uncertainty in international oil market. The Strait of Hormuz, that is one of the world's most important shipping routes for crude oil and natural gas. So when tensions rise in this region, energy prices often react quickly because traders, they fear possible disruption to global supplies. Now, it's very important to understand something here. Markets do not wait for certainty. They react to uncertainty. Even the possibility of disruption, it can push oil prices higher. And when oil prices go high, almost everything becomes expensive. Transport costs increase, manufacturing becomes costlier, businesses pay more for energy, and inflation begins to rise. That is where the story becomes important for Indians living in America and rather for Americans too. When inflation remains high, the US Federal Reserve usually becomes more cautious about lowering interest rate. Higher interest rate increase borrowing cost for businesses. Companies that depend heavily on investment, including many tech firms, suddenly find more expensive to raise money for expansion, research, and new hiring. And when companies start looking for ways to reduce expenses, payroll often becomes the first area which gets affected. And that is why some market analysts, they believe that prolonged geopolitical instability could indirectly increase pressure on tech companies that are already trying to control cost. It does not automatically mean layoff will happen because of a single event though, but it does create an economic environment where businesses become more careful about spending. Now imagine you are an Indian professional working in the US on an H-1B visa. Losing a job is never easy, right? But for an H-1B worker, it becomes much more than unemployment. It becomes an immigration challenge. Under current US immigration rule, many H-1B workers generally have only a limited grace period after losing employment to find another qualifying employer, change the immigration status, or prepare to leave the country. That means every round of corporate reconstructing that creates additional anxiety for thousands of skilled workers. And yes, there is another challenge here. For years, many professionals believed that if things did not go as planned in America, they could simply return to India's booming tech industry. But recent reports suggest that hiring has also slowed in parts of India's IT sector, making the job market more competitive for returning professionals. Some reports say that experienced engineers are accepting lower salaries than they earned in the US because competition has increased significantly. So, what does this all tell us? It tells us that today's global economy is deeply connected. A geopolitical crisis in one part of the world, it can influence oil prices. Oil prices can influence inflation. Inflation can influence interest rate. Interest rate can influence corporate spending, and corporate spending can ultimately influence the hiring decision. Now, that does not mean every geopolitical event will eventually lead to layoff, but it does remind us that international developments can eventually reach boardrooms, businesses, and families around the globe. For Indians working abroad, staying informed has never been more important because sometimes the biggest threat to your career it is not inside your office. It begins thousands of kilometers away. And yes, while economists are discussing the impact of war on global market, another controversy is now making headlines in Washington. Now this time, it involves diplomacy, allegations, and comments made by the US President, Mr. JD Vance. Let's move to our second story tonight. Well, for months, the world has been watching missiles, drones, military movement in West Asia, but behind the closed door, another battle has been unfolding. Not on the battlefield, but around the negotiating table. Even as tension between the US and Iran continue, diplomatic efforts have also been taking place, and now those negotiations have become the center of a fresh political controversy. Ladies and gentlemen, according to reports, Iranian negotiators allegedly sent a private message to the US Vice President, Mr. JD Vance, making serious allegations about individuals linked to the US administration. Well, the reported claim suggested that some people involved in diplomatic efforts were benefiting financially from the ongoing conflict. Well, these allegations have not been independently verified though, and there is no official evidence publicly confirming the claims here. Still, the report has generated significant political debate because they emerged at a time when West Asia remains deeply unstable. The whole controversy grew even bigger after the vice president he appeared on the Joe Rogan Experience podcast. During the interview, Mr. Vance he made a serious comment. In fact, not just one, he made a series of strong remarks too about the ongoing US-Iran situation. He said he believed that some individuals within the Israeli government wanted the military campaign against Iran to continue and were trying to influence Washington's diplomatic approach. At the very same time, Mr. Vance made it clear that he was not accusing the entire Israeli government, saying that many Israeli leaders also support diplomatic efforts and they do understand that a never-ending conflict is not in anybody's interest. Mr. Vance also stressed that his responsibility was to present American interest first. He argued that while foreign governments often try to influence the US policy, American leaders they must ultimately make decisions based on what they believe is best for the US. He further said that President Donald Trump he made his own independent decisions regarding Iran and he was not acting under any pressure from Israel. Perhaps the most important part of Mr. Vance's interview was his warning that military action alone it cannot solve the crisis. According to him, diplomacy remains essential if the region is to avoid a prolonged conflict, specifically when vital global shipping routes like the Strait of Hormuz continues to face uncertainty. So, in the end, this is why developments taking place inside diplomatic meeting rooms can eventually affect decisions made inside corporate boardrooms too. For now, negotiations have not officially ended, but tensions remain high and both diplomacy and military action continue side by side. The whole situation is evolving rapidly and governments across the globe, they are closely watching every new development. And yes, while global leaders continue searching for a diplomatic solution, another country has already taken a major step to protect its own citizens. This time, the focus is not on politicians, but on Indian sailors who are working in one of the world's most dangerous shipping route. Well, whenever we hear about US-Iran conflict, most of us immediately think about missiles, military bases and warships. But there is another group of people silently caught in the middle of this crisis. And no, they are not soldiers, they are not politicians, they are ordinary seafarers, and thousands of them are Indian. As tension continues to rise around the Strait of Hormuz, the government of India has taken a major precautionary step to protect Indian citizens working at the sea. According to the latest advisory, Indian authorities, they have directed ship owners ship managers and recruitment agencies not to deploy Indian seafarers on vessels that are traveling to the Strait of Hormuz until further notice. The decision comes after recent attack on commercial ships and growing security concern in one of the busiest shipping route. And it's very important because India is one of the world's largest supplier of seafarers. More than 300,000 Indian sailors work on merchant ship across the globe. Well, they transport oil, food, medicine, vehicle, and countless other goods that keep international trade moving every single day. But when conflict reaches major shipping lanes, these civilians they suddenly find themselves in extremely dangerous situation. According to the government sources, Indian nationals they have already lost their lives in incident that is linked to the ongoing conflict in Gulf region this year. These tragic developments have forced New Delhi to act very quickly in order to reduce further risk to Indian seafarers. The advisory issued by Directorate General of Maritime Administration, we can also call them DGMA, is very clear. Until further orders, Indian seafarers should not be deployed on ships that are expected to pass through the Strait of Hormuz. And at the same time, ship captains operating near the Persian Gulf have been asked to remain on high alert, closely monitor security warning, and stay in constant contact with Indian maritime authorities whenever necessary. And that is why, by the way, the Strait of Hormuz, it is such a big concern. This narrow stretch of water, it is one of the most important energy route in the world. A significant share of global crude oil and liquefied natural gas passes through this single shipping route corridor every single day. If commercial ships face disruption here, the impact is going to be felt far beyond West Asia. Oil prices can rise, shipping costs can increase, insurance premium become more expensive, and global supply chain, it comes under pressure. That is why governments across the globe are watching every development in this region very carefully. Indian authorities have also assured, by the way, assured the seafarers that emergency support system that remains active. The DGMA has asked ships and Indian crew members to immediately contact the designated maritime communication centers or the Indian Navy's Information Fusion Center, Indian Ocean Region, if they do require urgent assistance. Officials say that the whole situation is being monitored continuously and further discussion and decisions will be taken depending on how events unfold. For thousands of Indian families, this advisory offers an important reminder that global conflicts do not only affect governments and armies. They also affect ordinary people who are simply doing their job far from home. And yes, while India is trying to protect its citizens at the sea, another controversy has now emerged from inside Iran itself. This time, the focus is on fresh US airstrikes, serious allegations involving a hospital, and claims and counterclaims from both the ends. When we hear about war, we usually think about military bases, fighter jets, missile launches, and soldiers on the battlefield. But sometimes the biggest victims, they are neither soldiers nor the politicians, they are the ordinary civilians. They are families, they are children. And that's exactly what has now become the center of fresh controversy in the ongoing US-Iran conflict. Ladies and gentlemen, Iran has accused the United States of carrying out airstrikes that affected Shahid Baghei Hospital, including a department where children undergoing cancer treatment were receiving chemotherapy. According to Iranian officials, the incident focused the evacuation of hundreds of patients and caused panic among children and their families. Iran's foreign minister, he strongly condemned the attack, describing it as a serious violation of humanitarian principles. Now, these claims have come from Iranian officials and have not been independently verified, which is very important to note here. Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Ismail Baghei, he described the whole incident as a barbaric attack and compared it to the previous attack on healthcare facilities during regional conflict. In a statement shared on social media, he claimed that 211 patients receiving chemotherapy had to be evacuated because of the strike. He also alleged that children battling cancer had been forced to leave the hospital during the emergency. These statements reflect Iran's official position, but independent verification remains unavailable. And at the very same time, reports from inside Iran suggest that explosions were heard across several locations, including Bandar Abbas, Chebar, in fact, Qasem Island, and Khorramabad. Now, as military operations intensified here, Iranian officials also claimed that dozens of people had been killed and hundreds injured in the latest wave of strike. These casualty figures have not been independently confirmed though. The US has presented a very different account here. According to the US Central Command, the military operation targeted Iranian military capabilities that Washington says were being used to threaten the commercial shipping in the Strait of Hormuz. US officials stated that the objective was to weaken Iran's ability to disrupt one of the world's most important maritime trade routes. US military has not confirmed Iran's allegation regarding the reported impact on the hospital. In the meantime, Iran says that it has responded by targeting American military assets in the Gulf. The IRGC claimed that it has launched attack against the US Fifth Fleet in Bahrain and also announced that it had intercepted and destroyed an American MQ-9 surveillance drone using one of the air defense systems. Well, these are Iranian claims and not confirmed by the US. But yes, despite these fresh military exchanges, diplomacy has not completely stopped. Iranian officials say the talks between Washington and Tehran have not formally ended, but they have warned that future negotiations will depend whether previous understandings are respected. According to Iran's top negotiator, agreements only have meaning if both the ends continue to honor the commitment. And that's exactly why the current situation remains so unpredictable. On one side, military operations continue. On the other, diplomatic channels remain open. Now, whether the coming days bring more negotiations or more escalation is something the world is watching very, very closely. And while missiles and diplomacy continue to dominate the headlines, another development is quietly creating concern for thousands of Indians working in the US. This time, the focus shifts back to Silicon Valley, where economists say that global tension could once again influence hiring, investment, and the future of H-1B professionals. Well, if you are an Indian working in the US on H-1B or L-1 visa, you must be asking one simple question. What does a conflict in West Asia has to do with your job in the US, right? Well, the answer, according to many economists, is more than what people realize. At first glance, a military confrontation in the Persian Gulf and a software engineer working in California may seem completely unrelated to you. But in today's global economy, everything is interconnected. According to reports, recent tension involving the US and Iran, along with uncertainty surrounding commercial shipping through the Strait of Hormuz, have increased volatility in global energy market. Although a proposed US transit fee, it was later dropped. Economists say that continued instability in the region has kept concern over oil supplies alive. And why it matters? Because the Strait of Hormuz, that's one of the world's most important energy route. A large share of the world's oil passes through this narrow stretch of water. So whenever conflict threatens shipping in this region, oil prices can rise because markets fear supply disruption. And yes, when oil prices rise, inflation often follows. When inflation remains high, central banks usually become cautious about lowering interest rate. High interest rate makes borrowing even more expensive for businesses, specifically tech companies that depend on investment to expand, build new products, and invest in AI. As financing becomes more expensive, companies often begin reviewing their budgets very carefully. Hiring slows down, expansion plans are delayed, and in some cases, companies announce reconstructing or layoff. Now, for Indians, this becomes an immigration issue as much as employment issue. If an H-1B employee loses a job, they generally have only a limited period of time under current US immigration rule to secure another qualifying employer, change immigration status, or prepare to leave. And that's why every major layoff creates additional anxiety for thousands of skilled workers living in the US. In fact, there is another challenge. For many years, professionals believed that they could always return to India's tech sector if opportunity becomes limited, right? But according to recent reports, hiring has also slowed in several offshore tech centers, making competition much stronger than before. Some returning professionals are reportedly accepting significantly lower salaries than they earned in the US because companies now have access to a much larger talent pool. This does not mean that every Indian professional is at risk. And yes, it does not mean layoffs are certain simply because geopolitical tension continue. But economists say that these developments shows how closely global events and corporate decisions have become connected. And yes, moving to our last segment tonight, ladies and gentlemen, for years, thousands of Indians moved to the US with a simple plan: get a good job, buy a home, purchase a car, build saving, and slowly creating a better future for their families. It was a plan that worked for many people. But today, financial experts say that that plan is becoming difficult. The reason is not just immigration, it's economy. According to the recent reports, continued tension in West Asia have kept global energy markets under pressure. Higher oil prices have contributed to inflation concern, and that has made the job of the US Federal Reserve much more complicated. While policymakers they continue debating the future path of interest rate, economists believe that borrowing costs could remain higher for longer if inflation stays elevated. Now, why should an Indian family in US care about interest rate? Because interest rate affect almost every major financial decision. They influence home loans, car loans, business loan, credit card payment, and even job opportunities. So when borrowing becomes expensive, companies become more careful about spending money. Instead of expanding rapidly, many businesses focus on reducing cost and protecting the profit. Well, that is one reason why tech companies have become far more cautious over past few years. Hiring has slowed, budgets have become tighter, and many companies have announced reconstructing program to control the expenses. Well, for H-1B professionals, this creates a double challenge. One side, higher interest rate makes home ownership more expensive. Monthly mortgage payment become larger. In fact, refinancing existing loans becomes more difficult, and buying a new home becomes a much bigger financial commitment. On the other end, a slower technology sector means job security also becomes more uncertain. If a company announces layoff, many H-1B workers generally have only a limited period of time under current immigration rule to secure another qualifying employer, change their immigration status, or prepare to leave the country. That's why financial planning has become just as important as career planning for many professionals who are working in the US. And perhaps that is the biggest lesson of all of our stories tonight. Whether we spoke about tension in West Asia, the global market, diplomatic developments, India's decision to protect its sailors, the impact of geopolitics on the tech sector, or rising interest rate in the US, every story points towards one reality. In today's world, global events are no longer far away. A conflict in one region, it can influence your monthly expenses. With that, that's an end of tonight's Skyline edition. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Triti Yatri, and I'll see you in the next episode.